My name is Mike West and I'm Head of Primary at Laude Fontenebro School in Madrid and part of the International Schools Partnership. After such a long period of the schools being closed, and regardless of when they reopen, the truth is that at least for some time, they will be very different from what they were before. For this reason, we believe that it is very important for schools to plan to adapt to the new reality. This planning affects all aspects, including many that we have not noticed until now, because now it is vitally important to make sure that we have thought about everything that needs to be considered. Fundamentally, it will be necessary to foresee all the actions aimed at guaranteeing the health and safety of our entire school community. But it will also be crucial to pause and plan how the learning process will be that we will have to develop when we return to school. In this sense, we have some key advantages compared to the situation that we had to deal with when the closure of the schools was announced. We have time to plan, and also we have the valuable experience that we have gained over an extensive period of distance learning. What has worked well, what hasn't, and above all, what parts of the experience that we have accumulated in these months can we take and integrate into daily teaching practice to make learning when we go back to school even more effective. When the schools were closed, most of them responded by trying to replicate as much as possible and be faithful to what had been happening in the classroom. In fact, a good measure of the success of the school's response was precisely to assess how similar the students' day-to-day learning at school was to the distance learning that was taking place in their homes. Now, with our sights set on September, we have the time and resources to really design something different that starts with a point of view that must also be different. So instead of thinking about what we have to do to ensure that the learning experience at home is a carbon copy of the learning experience that was developed in the schools, perhaps the starting point should be to focus on what can only be learned in school, in that part of the learning that takes place when students are in the classroom, and from there, start building. It is in this context that hybrid learning systems, known as blended learning, can come into their own. But what is blended learning? Well, if we think of two situations with one at each end of a spectrum, we have at one end the situation that existed before the schools closed, where learning took place in classrooms, and at the other, the situation after the schools closed, where learning takes place at home. Blended learning will be located somewhere around the halfway point between the two. Or, put another way, it's a mix of face-to-face learning with online learning, in which resources and technology play an important role as facilitator and medium. It's a combination that allows us to keep the best of each of the models. It means that the theoretical content related to learning is available to students outside of class time, allowing them to work and acquire them at their own pace, and dedicate the classroom time with the teacher to do the more practical activities and have these evaluated. Blended learning represents a series of important positive aspects. There is greater flexibility by diverging from the traditional model of 1 hour of class time, one teacher, one subject, one class of students. Secondly, there is greater adaptability by allowing each student to customize their pace and learning context. Thirdly, it also allows prioritizing the practical part of the class, which is developed in person and shared with the teacher, and which is the time when the most questions and difficulties arise for the students. It also allows more active learning to take place. The role of the teacher is not that of someone who simply imparts knowledge, but rather a person who becomes a guide to learning that accompanies the student. The student becomes the true active subject of their own learning and takes responsibility for it. This model involves a series of challenges. Firstly, technological resources that are reliable, accessible to everyone, and easy to use. Technology must be a means and a facilitator at the service of learning, never an end in itself, or of course, an obstacle to learning. The second challenge is the existence of adequate materials for the students' independent work, so that they allow them to work autonomously and independently, so that they arrive at class fully prepared. And the success in the effectiveness of this model of learning requires the will and collaboration of both parties, teacher and student. In overcoming these challenges, schools have a great responsibility. It is we who must decide upon models of learning in which technology is integrated, who must guarantee the existence of quality and adequate resources, and who must invest in the constant training of our staff. And above all, it is the schools who have the responsibility to analyse, anticipate and guarantee that the best learning takes place in our classrooms, be they physical or virtual.